Hello, everyone. Good evening. So I'm Dan Winter, and I'm here with Shelley Evans of theshareablewave.com. Again, how wonderful.
How wonderful for me. It's wonderful.
And Shelley has been working on some issues very parallel to what we've been studying in our recent conferences. Actually, we had 4 issues of the Holy Grail Science series, which have been so well received. And 2 of them were about the Templar agenda of the repair of the fabric of time. And in Shelley's email to me asking what we were going to be talking about today, she was saying about this problem in time and the nesting. Yes, what was it? How did you express that, Shelley?
I don't know how I worded it in the email, but precisely that, because I mean, time is one thing when we're inhabiting this body. It's an entirely different thing when we are inhabiting the array. And so when we have, for example, so many effects upon, the gravitational effects on our planet is just one thing. What happens when near death and you're releasing all this natural DMT into your body? I mean, that's also, there's so many elements that affect time. So really the conversation, I thought I had a great insight into what was creating the Mandela effect and this convergence of timelines. But yes. I just needed you to do the math for me.
Yes. So keywords: Mandela effect and converging timelines, which is excellent. Yes. And see how that plays perfectly into what the Templars were talking about the repair of the fabric of time and the fractality of time for those like shape. And just to say, toward later in this conversation, we also wanted to review instructions and science for Theraphi plasma healers doing remote healing and how the principles of remote healing. Go ahead, Shelley.
Because it's the same thing. It's the same question.
Yeah, that's right. That's thank you, Shelley. I think I'm retiring. You're so good.
No, please don't. I'm the one that called you and said, please help me. I need you to help me think about this.
Yes. So, but this is the point, that if we study the mechanics of what enables remote healing, which obviously has to do embedding and resonance and linking and this fractality in time and space, that we can understand at the same time the physics of what enables remote healing, and then provide practical instructions for people like Shelley who are using both Theraphi and plasma fire doing remote healing. And Shelley has amazing stories to tell, I understand, of doing remote healing work with.
Yes, and just practical application, how you can take the wonderful, precise science that you give us and actually know how to actually use that in a practical setting. So we'll get there.
Yes, and Einstein called action at a distance spooky, but now we know that if you know how longitudinal arrays couple at a distance and how that transfer occurs, for example, it works better at sunrise and sunset. It works better if sender and receiver are on magnetic lines. So this is an introduction to the physics of the kind of resonance coupling that enables healing at a distance. But before we get to that, we wanted to talk about the basics about understanding time and fractality in time, convergence in timelines, and synchronicity. And I think one place to start there is clear that studying synchronicity sometimes gets so confusing and people end up studying numerology.
Right.
And that's kind of a woo-woo new age problem. It's not
in there. Yeah. I tried that.
It's confusing. And so we need to reduce it to some very basic, important principles. And one principle is really quite simple. And we have a detailed article on this. It's goldenmean.info/coincidence. And in that article, we were talking about the Mayan calendric predictions around 2012. And the fact is, if you tracked the timelines according to the Mayan backwards to their harmonic convergence as it was, and harmonic convergence is exactly what we're talking about, convergence of harmonics, that there was actually a sequence of events in a timeline based on golden ratio in time. And there's a whole map of a beautiful, huge spiral of dozens, if not hundreds of events that fit golden ratio in time. And so that introduced this idea that synchronicity, connections in time, are based on charge coupling, which is to say electrical resonance, we would say technically, capacitive coupling, or charge rotation coupled by embedding. Now, that then sort of begs the question, was Einstein right when he said time space is bent? And I think that's not a useful language, actually. My opinion is that once you understand what time is, you can use a more precise language. Time is simply a name for charge that rotates. When charge rotates, it stores inertia, and that's the origin and only origin and definition of mass. And when charge rotates, the same charge rotating, it has a period. And the period of that rotation is the only origin and definition of time. In other words, time is a name for the period of charge rotation, nothing more, nothing less.
And also manifestation.
Well, in the sense that when the charge rotation couples and forms a wave node, instead of a wave that's traveling, it forms a node, a still point. That's what we call manifestation. Crystallization, literally mass. So when the waves can cross and phase lock, and then you have a standing wave, that's called matter out of light. That's called manifestation, or
And that's what we're trying to do with healing.
Exactly. Yes, yes. And so then if we now know that time is only a name for the period of charge rotation, then when Einstein said, well, when you accelerate, time speeds up, and that's confusing as all hell. Actually, what's happening is when you accelerate mass, it's charged in the form of a donut that's rotating. Now, if you accelerate that in the ether, a certain amount of the inertia of that acceleration is going to translate in vorticity and accelerate spin rate. Right. So the physics of the reason time speeds up when you accelerate is because the translation of vorticity converts a certain amount of mechanical acceleration into rotational speed acceleration. And obviously, if you speed up the rate of spin, that's called time. That's why the seconds on your clock hand will speed up or slow down depending on acceleration. So saying that time space is bent is not helpful language. Saying that time is simply charge rotation helps you understand what was meant by space-time. It's simply a fabric within which, if you accelerate, the rate of rotation increases. So now we know what time is. Then we can say what synchronicity is, which is when one rotation pattern embeds inside another rotation pattern, enabling the transfer of charge. That's the physics of synchronicity, literally embedding embeddability. And that would then imply that embeddability perfected by definition is fractality. So you see where we're going with this, that for the little spin to fit inside the big spin, for you to be inside the mind of God, et cetera, fractality is always the solution, which happens to be the solution of compression. And that makes sense because we're little and God's big, so.
That's so fun. And you know what? This is also, we have to really, I think, acknowledge the reference point, the point of reference, right?
Yes.
Because that enables us to almost use that frequency like an area code or an address to go and view from any perspective or any place, etc.
Yes, and that's beautiful because establishing reference points is the first thing you need to do when you begin to talk about things like time travel and action at a distance, because that acts as a connection point from the past to the future, et cetera. And to understand how that works electrically and not get confused, I actually had some examples in mind. Okay. So now where we want to go with this conversation is, for example, when Yahtzee Swaru in the Pleiadians, Dosha, admits that one of the reasons their whole gene pool has fractionated and is losing their soul, although they don't put it in that term, was too much time travel. Well, geez. Right. Why would too much time travel scramble your soul? What's the physics here? and then at the same time, the Templars, actually Bueller was saying things like Montauk, fractionated the fabric of time, and that let more parasites, like the Greys and the Dracos, into the astral plasma aura of Earth. So by fractionating the timelines, we cause the Earth's aura to bleed. Hello. Well, if you're doing too much time travel, I guess your aura is going to bleed too. And I think Swaru Yahtzee is an example of that. So it would be helpful to know what the Templars, William Bueller, we've been talking about that in 3 films now, goldenmean.info/Buehler, Buehler. It's the Templar agenda, the repair the fabric of time. So you have all these beautiful golden spiral magnetic maps on Europe and America called Rochelle Grid, which is a
Yeah.
Templar map for how to repair the fabric of space-time, literally to restore Valentine fractality, rose-like fractality, to both the arc of the traverse of the pattern of space and time. And if you do that, then the whole thing, both spatially and temporally, becomes more centripetal and thus more negentropic. So it's obvious that if the pattern of charge in both space and time becomes more fractal, they become more centripetal, more negentropic, and things stop falling apart. I mean, it's pretty simple, actually. So you can see that it's obvious that the fabric of space, when it gets fractal, gets healed. That's, the magnetic map of Prague is a rose, and they get a lot of tourists and money. Well, it's the same with the magnetic map of time, that if event histories are also nestable, embeddable, which is to say fractal, then also self-organization, negentropy occurs. Now, but in order to make that real, I wanted to play with some examples. Maybe you can think of examples. I had some examples in mind.
Yeah, you can go ahead, but really what you're describing is what a skilled healer actually is doing. It's that high electric constant or the non-destructive implosive capacitor. That's exactly what you've described in every one of these films. But yeah, you go ahead. I mean, I do have a few examples, but go ahead and I'll chime in. Okay, yes, and you're right. It is about when the charge is implosive. That's, you can call it capacitance if you like, or it's, the perpendicular vector is magnetic. But either way, it's a rose that learns to implode and therefore self-organize. It's very simple in both space and time. But so the self-organizing is the highlight, is the real key here.
That's absolutely, yes, origin of negentropy, as it were.
Yes.
So, but a practical example, that if anyone has a very intense emotion, either good or bad, in some place, that acts like a kind of a smoke ring, a donut, which stays there in space and time. And so anyone that comes into that room for the next X number of centuries is going to feel something in that place, whether it was a wonderful bliss emotion or whether it was a horrible death, whatever it was. So you have a shadow in the pattern of space-time with the intensity. The reason, the physics of the why that happens is because you set up a longitudinal wave node, the still point, as it were. And so there's a ripple effect in both space and time from that implosive still point of that intense emotion, whether it's wonderful or horrible. Either way, you've created a wrinkle in the fabric of time. And Wrinkle in Time is a good book. And so that is, so then a practical example. So when, to use our Grail film series as an example, when John Trophimus, purportedly the son of Magdalene, the Black Madonna, lifts his knee in his bliss, and melts that coffin lid, which the Roman Legion carried that stone for a decade, called the Grail stone, the platinum of the Grail, that left an imprint in the fabric of time, the intensity of that bliss. And so then for 300 years, everyone came to that spot in Europe and wanted to be buried there. The city of Arles made money because everyone in Europe wanted to be buried where there was that wrinkle in time. Or like why all the tourists want to go to where Padma Simbhava melted the stone with his handprint in India, the same physics. So that's a wrinkle in time.
Okay, and also it really leads into the conversation of understanding the Akashic records and how everything that has ever been thought or it's all recorded. Yes,
that's good. And so this leads us to the fact that an array of longitudinal wave nodes, whose still points we call sacred space, are most efficient when they're fractal, dodecacosa, in that array, like the Earth grid is dodecacosa, that creates an array in both space and time, which is then what the Aboriginals called songline, dreaming track, and we call it the collective unconscious, the communion of saints, the Akashic records. But now we know the physics, we have something in them. And so When we create a node in that array, we can access the radio to ancestral memory. And
yes, and that's what's so important, is that for everybody to really recognize that we all come in with this ability. Therefore, we all come in with all the knowledge that we could ever dream of. We don't have to try and become, it's not that inviting fifth dimension in and that whole idea, but I mean, we already have access to that in every single cell of our being. And so the real question, the real, I think, helpful lesson is to teach people how to tap into that and remember for themselves.
well, yes, and beautiful that then you use the word fifth dimension, because even the Pleiadians always say, insult the humans and say, well, we're 5D and you're only 3D,
Right.
so you're inferior. But now that we know what that array is, embedding in that longitudinal fractal array of stillness, what's meant by the fifth dimension is the next overtone harmonic superposed by golden ratio that enables you to embed, implode, and use phase conjugation to access the longitudinal node array through the still point. What that means in practice is, if you learn to relax and have absolute peace and bliss at the still points, both in time and space, and know where the still points, the power points are, you get immediate and wonderful access to that DNA radio. Obviously, which is
yes, and you can find out where they are through that magical human quality called feeling. We can become a match and embed and become fractal.
Yes, and beautiful, thank you. And a piece of that story that we emphasized in some of the earlier films had to do with the astral hygiene of that process. For example, telephoning ancestors. So we talked about the fact that the Olmec used the same phase conjugate mirror called an obsidian black mirror for ancestor phone calls. And Nostradamus put a phase conjugate black mirror coating on the bottom of the scrying cup to see the future. And then D.M. Kelly used a showstone, also a black obsidian phase conjugate mirror for scrying for ancestor and angel phone calls. And in each case, they were externalizing the implosive focus of their attention into an external phase conjugate media, super high dielectric phase conjugate mirror for scrying. And they did. There were ancestor phone calls. But then you see that conversation got controversial when multiple sources, at least three, Harold Kautzvilla and Johann Fritz of the Secret Space Program, they're all very sure that also the phase conjugate dialectic called the Philosopher's Stone of the Kaaba stone and John D. Scrying were infected with the black goo of the carbon nano of the galaxy's most aggressive artificial intelligence, the black goo, meaning the bad guys use the same radio.
Well, and here's the problem with externalizing instead of finding the kingdom within you.
I like that, Shelley. I think that's part of where we're going with this. Exactly. Okay. So Shelley intuits exactly the useful point here, that in the fact that you then, the scrying process, whether it was D.M. Kelly or Nostradamus, when they're focusing their ability to radio ancestors into a mirror outside their head instead of inside, then you have what I call an astral hygiene challenge.
A big problem.
Well,
you just invited anybody to your party.
Thank you. Exactly. That's exactly where we're going with this. So the point I wanted to make about that is, and so we had a big controversy in our John D. and Kelly study group called the Facebook group Alchemy Ophanim Enochian. And suddenly John D., who's supposed to be a hero, is actually calling some of the bad guys. And this is an astral hygiene. And so, in fact, years ago, Michael Sarian was saying, oh, John D., when he called those angels, was actually calling some nasties as well. And well, of course, angelic, large, intelligent plasma beings, there's going to be both ones that are good for us and ones that aren't good for us. It's normal. But what is the principle behind the astral hygiene, which is where we wanted to go with this. And I do think John Dee had some problems there. I agree. And even though Vincent Bridges said that I was John Dee, I at least have a fragment of that soul memory. So maybe I'm being apologetic here, or a piece of me, whatever.
Well, you know, we all learn. We're all, what is it? Please be patient. God is not finished with me yet.
Exactly. But so the story that we used to talk about that was when a circle of shaman in an indigenous tribe, whether it's Africa or South America, when they get together to phone ancestors, they do a bliss ritual, they go into a trance, and then there's a circle of them, and they have a severely focused intent that says, only our family of extended ancestors is going to make phone calls here, and no one else is invited.
Yes.
And the focus and intensity of that intent is an example of the sorting of astral hygiene. So
No, I was just going to say we can come back to that because what you're saying is more poignant, but I do have many practical kind of examples if we want to come back to that later.
Well, it's
intention and attention. Yes. I mean, so anyway, carry on. I don't want to lose the thread of where you're going with that.
Well, and you have some indigenous blood, right?
Yes.
Yes. So Shelley is the shaman in question here.
I get to play a lot.
But anyway, so just to finish that story, so the dedication of that intent has a sorting factor, and it's true that if the bliss experience was inside your own head, then the astral hygiene challenges are less. Whereas if you had externalized it, like looking for your bliss in a phase conjugate mirror outside your body instead of inside your body. Remember the old hologram with the mirror and the magnifying glass. The story is called From Hologram to Hologram in my first book, Golden Mean.info/book 1. Basically, that was that, you know, the lady's carrying the mirror and the magnifying glass in her book, in her purse, is too damn heavy. So she goes and has a hologram made of the mirror and the magnifying glass. And sure enough, you look in the hologram and the item is inside the hologram are magnified in the magnifying glass in the hologram. But then she gets home and she's very upset and demands her money back because you can't see yourself in the mirror in the hologram. You can see other items in the hologram in the mirror, but you can't see yourself in the mirror.
Yeah, big hint.
So she went back and demanded her money back from the guy that made the hologram, who is God. and she learned how to suddenly begin to be able to see yourself outside the hologram, inside the hologram, from inside to outside. So it went from hologram to hologram. And that is you find some of the original light and you get into phase. And the map to that phase discipline of what enables the hologram outside your head to exchange inertia with the hologram inside your head happens to be the Hebrew alphabet. It's an example of phase lock.
Yes, but this is also when you see, it's not that you're seeing an eyeball, but you're seeing through the eyeball. But isn't this also speaking to why using gold, as they did, monatomic gold, or the danger of perhaps ingesting psychedelics to achieve this connection is a problem, and it's going to take you to the same issue. That's why it's not in service to your longevity, to your true capacity of ensoulment.
Yes, and I think my partner at the time, Gamadi, who led a meditation school in North Carolina, that's what she said. So many who came there came with astral hygiene and huge holes in their aura. And in many cases, it was people who use drugs, actually. And we discussed how long it takes doing meditation and focus to repair the holes in your aura. It's important to understand that the holes in your aura form when there's asymmetry in the plasma fire at center. So the recreational drugs can light the fire, but they don't light the fire symmetrically. And that means that the flame then doesn't burn evenly, which means there are then holes in the aura. And obviously with holes in the aura, you have parasite problems. And by the way, this is not subjective. The holes in the aura are measurable with GDV as an example. And so, when your kids are using recreational drugs, you can tell them, well, there's a way to measure the holes in the aura,
Mhm.
and the coherence of that aura is harmonic inclusiveness, which is fractality, which is why a blissful heart repairs the aura.
Yes, and coming from a medical perspective, because not to disregard the healing that can come from people who have, for instance, used psychedelics, or psilocybin, or cannabis, whatever the case may be, but to be very aware and not rely on it, and just use it to open that gate, because once the gate is open, you don't need to keep opening the gate.
Yeah.
So, probably once is good.
and
And then you do the work to get back there yourself.
Yeah, that's nice. And that reminds me of the old ayahuasca story that, the first time you go to the magic mushroom, well, ayahuasca is the mushroom, but call it the magic mushroom. The old magic mushroom story was the first time you go to the mushroom and you think you're seeing through interstellar television,
Yeah.
looking through the interstellar mycelial fabric of the mushroom.
Yes.
The second time you go to the same mushroom, you realize that the mushroom is looking through you and not the other way around.
Yeah, but that's actually a really great, I think, point as well, because everything about our cosmos, everything about our religion, about mythologies, are all just basic anatomy lessons. They're just anatomical, maps, really.
That's why when Bentov wrote Stalking the Wild Pendulum, and he described in the Cosmic Comic Book, the Kundalini visions of the interstellar mechanics, it looked like he was traveling inside a living cell, actually. It was literally biophysics, interstellar.
And this is fractal.
Yeah, well, yes, exactly. The mitochondria is an example of that fractality. And at an interstellar level, that was Ankh and Aleph and Omega. It's quite a story. Well, we were supposed to, as this conversation went forward, it was supposed to lead us to practical instructions for distance healing.
Yes.
Are we a bit closer now? So what we've said is that the way, for example, when we measured with Theraphi.net, first Myra from Paris and Athens, who's having a baby. It's wonderful. Read her story of lucid dreaming with Theraphi in the Theraphi blog. Anyway, so she documented the dramatic trigger of lucid dreaming with Theraphi. And then we talked about the physics that if you phase conjugate implode your aura, it makes your longitudinal coherence Ka, Ba, Kesjan, rainbow light body, plasma bubble more coherent and therefore more projectable. So now we have a new international lucid dreaming teacher who's recommending Theraphi to all her students because it's a dramatic lucid. Yeah, and we said many times that if Jodie Foster is a lesson here, in the movie Contact, that interstellar travel is very much like lucid dreaming. Hint: what is a portal or a stargate? Which is to say, it's Theraphi on steroids. I mean, it's a higher amperage, broader spectra, but same principle.
Yes.
And so this then gives an introduction to physics of time travel and what they're calling the magic mirror and the time reverse mirror and time reversal. It all has to do with that implosion point where you connect with the superluminal at the longitudinal node of the Planck threshold. How longitudinal waves phase lock transverse in a phase conjugate where pine cones kiss noses.
Yes, and then to find the point of reference that's actually going to be useful to your client. There's no point bringing in all kinds of images and information that doesn't serve them today in this moment. Really, so keeping it practical, it's what will help you to take the first step. That might be a leap and it might be a baby step, but really that's what we want to do.
And point of reference is a good word for it. In fact, maybe that then introduces some of the practical mechanics of distance healing, which we want to cover. Because an example of a point of reference is, in psychotronics, it was called a psychotronic witness. It could be a nice photograph with the right energy or hair or fingernails, something that represents meaningfully and energetically the person to whom you're sending. And also, Go ahead.
And in that regard, if I'm doing long distance healing, the best that I can suggest, and we often will do it this way, I'll have them on a video watching the Theraphi. So we're connected visually, audio, they're getting the sound, but as well, we have very much specified intention. And now during the session, our attention is amplifying the intention. So that's what we're collapsing and manifesting into that field. And it's that sacred point that then ripples out and affects this self-organization throughout all time. So it's not just affecting them personally, and then it's affecting, you know, all of their life, their career, their family, their environment, their community. So this is the shareable wave that ripples out. But I missed one point. What was I gonna? Oh, I know, I add water. So I put a glass, they hold water and I have water. I place the water on top of, so I write down very simple, we distill it down to their simplest, most profound kind of intention. I place that in the Theraphi, and then I place a glass of water on the Theraphi. And again, this goes back to my native Aboriginal tradition that I just follow along with my instincts. But after the session, I will take that water and I will either set it in the sun so that it's amplified from the sun's rays. It depends on what we're trying to accomplish, right? I mean, a full moon is wonderful, or mostly the most important thing is I'll pour it onto the earth, into the tree. It's like when you're using the peace pipe, you know, that smoke carries the blessings. But in this way, you pour the water is absorbed by the earth mother and the trees, and it's shared throughout all of life. So it's an amplification of that shareable wave.
Oh, it's beautiful. You know, that's such a nice addition to the story. You know, we need to suggest that others do that, because the water, of course, is a phase conjugator. The hydrogen's fractal. It's a communicator at a distance, and the sender and receiver are both focused on water. And Theraphi is famous, the plasma for charging water. It's a beautiful insight. And so then let's fit that to the other pieces of the instruction. That's a beautiful addition, Shelley. Thank you. That the other pieces of the instruction to understand the healing at a distance is that connection of what Shelley is calling the reference points, which is the still points, is served if sender and or receiver are on magnetic lines or magnetic cross points. Yeah. That's helpful. Another thing that's helpful is sunrise or sunset for either sender or receiver, because again, right angles, phase conjugator, why Agnihotra works, because of longitudinal embedding, enabling action at a distance. Another thing, of course, that would be useful would be equinox solstice would be an example, because you have that right angle relationship. And the other thing we did find was that, as Shelley is saying, if the receiver is focused on, because Valerie did some experiments here, and it definitely is helpful if the receiver is actually very much aware and focused on at the same time. It makes a difference. We even found that with doing it with horses, that the horses would stand up and be at attention. They're very telepathic in that way. So all of these things that increase the charge coupling between the sender and receiver.
Yes.
And so that now we're beginning to understand that healing at a distance should not be called spooky. Einstein had the wrong word. It is a science which is teachable based on this rotational embedding called charge coupling that's enabling. And the part of this that Einstein found spooky is that, in fact, the longitudinal wave, which is a gravity wave, has a superluminal component. And that's what enables this action at a distance to be so fast. It's actually a harmonic series of golden ratio exponents times the speed of light. That's what's enabling the action at a distance. And that's proven by Raymond Chow's work, showing the most dominant speed faster than light that's ever been measured is right around golden ratio times the speed of light, between 1.5 and 1.7 in all the measurements, which is the smoking gun proving our theory of gravity and how longitudinal waves make this action at a distance possible. So.
Yes, and then if we wanted to amplify that even further, you've done some videos, they're probably some time back, with Lou de Bourbon caressing the diamond.
Caressing
if
the facets of the
both
diamond.
Yeah, but if both parties, healer, healee, and that whole healer, that's a misnomer. That's not the right word, but I don't know what the right word is. Nonetheless, the practitioner and the client will say, if both parties have already prepared in their own body as part of their preparation session for the Theraphi, again, that amplifies results. So there's so many, I mean, the basics are the same, set your intention, but there are so many useful ways to really amp up those results and really fine tune it. It's like a laser instead of a light bulb. And again, of course, that's the 4-wave mixing, and that's where we're going.
Yes, yeah, and that's beautiful. Thank you, Shelley. So we have been talking about the caressing the facets of the diamond graphics are at goldenmean.info/Octa Yoga. And it was a series of figure 8 movements that both sender and receiver can do to increase the phase conjugate implosion of the node. And the other example we've been speaking about recently, which has been picked up, is now going all around Facebook, is that famous book, Infinity Walk by Deborah Lawrence.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Where they walk.
No, that's so good as well.
And do a cross crawl, and the corpus callosum gets hot and dyslexia disappears. And that is a way of linking sender and receiver, absolutely. And of course, if they did some of that together, which is the quality of grace, it's like a yoga dance at a distance.
And it's an anatomy lesson.
Ah, yes, very nice.
And if you're more interested in a cosmic lesson, then you learn the anatomy, and it applies to our cosmos, because everything is precisely as above, so below, as within, so without. I did not even begin to understand how could constellations that were named, like way before our anatomy was even recognized, have the same names. How do we have a fornix in our brain and a fornix in the as a galaxy? And this goes on for every single element. And this is really referring to the raising of the Kundalini and how it affects the pineal gland and so on. That's really the focus. But again, the whole labyrinth walk, what did you call it? The infinity walk?
Yes.
Yeah. So that's
labyrinth is another. The labyrinth is another perfect example. goldenmean.info/labyrinth. You'll see all the graphics there as well. It's another example of recursion embedding perfected, where you walk to a still point and feel that bliss and closure. Yes.
And interferometry, because you want to know how those waves are mixing, how those.
Yeah, where the nodes.
The nodes.
That find places of agreement. And that still point is fractal, and we call it sacred space. And that's where it works. And that's where.
And so then that's a unification, that's uniting, and then we go into the sacred marriage from there. I mean, every thread touches all points, and this is the oneness of who we are and what we represent as human beings as well, that oneness, but we see it in nature.
Yeah, and just another example of the sense in which the concept of living body applies to temple. So temple was a name for a living body. So the famous book, Temple in Man, Robert Lawler writing about Schwaller de Lubitz, where temple geometry is actually body geometry, which is actually, as Shelley is saying, it's the biomechanics of bliss geometry, literally how to ignite Kundalini in the stone geometry of the temple. That's what Temple in Man, which is the basis of alchemy as well.
That's exactly right. That's why I have a 6-week course called Aculomi Temple. It's like the acupoints within the body. Lomi, that's a Hawaiian thing. And it's a Hawaiian massage. So it's just a combining play on words. But it's all about the temple. That's what we are.
Yes. Oh, I love the Hawaiian words for that. That's fun. All I can think of is the Minahunis I learned about from Ron.
Yeah. Aren't they great? I mean, we're gonna go to Ireland and do this whole Agni Hotra thing in Ireland. But again, that's the leprechaun, the Menahuni.
Yeah, that's right.
And they're not limited to Ireland or Hawaii.
No. Well, they're
get around.
They're nature spirits. They're intelligent plasma. They're famous for being mischievous, but yet at the same time, they said the nature spirits pick up the flame from the aura of the children, and that's how they ignite the growth of the plants. And so that famous book by the famous British book that shows pictures of the nature spirits that was investigated by the British Royal Society, they found out that the little girls who made the pictures that the nature spirits only showed up on the film because the nature spirits' little ghostly plasma was charged by the aura of the blissful children taking the pictures. So the fact that there were children present with bliss in their aura enabled the nature spirits to show up on the film. And this is documented historically.
Yes, and it really underlines the importance of knowing how to create bliss.
Yes.
And so even if that bliss is a momentary aha moment, it's the same electricity, it's the same function physiologically.
Yes, and then the ability to see the nature spirits enables us to interact with them. Until then, they think we're drunk because we don't talk to them. But actually, what's called clairvoyance is longitudinal interferometry. So the same thing that puts bliss in your aura enables you to see clairvoyantly, which enables you to see the nature spirits. That's why we're so determined that once we teach the kids to see without their eyes with bliss in their brainwave frequencies, flameandmind.com. Now we want to prove that enables the kids to see the nature spirits.
Okay, and that also brings us right back to the question of time, to the experience of time. Because when you're seeing those nature spirits and engaging with them, you're out of time as it relates to this physical body. You've entered a special realm. and the point of all of this to teach is how to keep those channels open. So it would be similar to saying how to keep the channels open from our beta mind to the alpha, to the theta, to the delta, and so on. How to keep that channel open so that your beta mind can perceive and make use of this information that we're accessing.
Well, and that's good. And to try to talk about that as science, we know that the alpha, beta, theta, and delta, but particularly the theta, the very low frequencies, which in my case, with years of Kundalini, my theta is very large, low frequency, which by the way is around 5 to 8 hertz, which is Schumann-like. So when those low frequencies become very coherent in your brain waves, obviously you're entrained with Schumann, which is Mother Earth's radio, as it were, then we call it a day out of time in the Mayan sense, or you say being timeless, or some people say time is not real. Really, that's wrong. Time is real. Time is charge rotation. That's very real. But when you approach a still point in a perfect golden spiral, all rotations can phase embed at one point. So you can interact with a whole nest of different speeds of rotation at once. So you don't become timeless. What you do is you have now charge coupled with all the different possible spin rotation rates, which is the different parts of time. So what that still point isn't timeless, it's time full.
It's very time full. And why I think in sacred literatures and so on, even, I mean, when we're talking about meditation, you often hear empty your mind. That Om, well, that Om is like the resistor going up the chakras, right? Like making it safe, just keeping your body safe from bringing in too much information that you can't handle. And then you know, what would happen if you have too much charge in your body?
Well, it's true. And there is a point during Kundalini, when your inner voice needs to say, stop, you know, you've been handling lightning long enough. It's really true. Yeah. I know that. But interesting that we did spectrum analyze a properly pronounced Om. And in fact, you can see that it's a perfect caduceus leading to a still point, and that harmonic cascade leads to a perfect still point in the audio phonon plicative. You can see the graphic at goldenmean.info/harmonics. Point being that Om is just another way to do a caduceus to a still point in sound, really.
Yes, but another practical application when you actually know what you're doing and why you're doing it.
Yes, thank you.
You know, it's like the Amen or the Amon's horn. I mean, again, that's in your brain, and it's relating to the hippocampus, and the hippocampus is our organ of memory. And why is it important to remember who we really are, so that we're not captured by this external source? When you recognize who you really are in every cell of your being, now you cannot be captured.
And it also, looking at the geometry of the glands in your brain as a way to make the time envelope around your body bigger, which is simply another name for harmonic inclusiveness, which is how doctors measure immune health. The more harmonics that are included in your heart, it's the definition of immune health medically. Well, the same number of harmonics in your breath and your brainwaves and heart mean that imploding cascade is creating that more nested list of do loops, perfect embedding. And when the Dracos admitted they were losing their soul, the measurement of that was loss of long-term memory. And so now we know that gathering those memories together into one requires entering that still point where the most number of harmonics can embed. So embedding is a solution to making your memory big, which is a direct, very practical, tangible measurement of how much soul you got, which is why emphasis on ancestor memory was so important in tribes.
It's so important, but we can teach that. And you have some practical applications. I Thrive. What are some of the other ones? Just so people know that they can go and just
it's true
start today.
The breath exercises, thanks to Patrick at ithrive.com, ithrve.com. And the breath exercises for sacrocranial entrainment, also measurable with flameandmind.com, which has both HRV and EEG input options, flameandmind.com, ithrive.com. And so, yes, it's true that there's 6 actually biofeedback options, all iOS, and you can find them at also craniosacral-app.com, which is Patrick Bauti, our programmer's website. But yes, very practically, if you learn to breathe that caduceus, you're entraining the Mayer wave, which is your spine liquid pump, which is the beginning of Kundalini bliss. And indeed, the breath is the yoga of bliss. That's part of how we teach kids to have bliss as well. So thank you.
And then amp that up with the super imploder water. I mean, you know, you got an open door right there. You know, you can't help but tap into it. It's tapping into you. I say consciousness has us. We don't have consciousness.
Yes, and water, people were water's way of deciding to move around. So
yeah. Crystals too.
With those low frequencies, which we program into the water vortex, is exactly how we programmed Flame and Mind. And the same brainwave low frequencies of bliss are Theraphi.net's infrasound.
But this also speaks to how water communicates.
Yes, exactly.
So one message, you hold the message in your body, you know that you're affecting the water that's maybe in the bodies of your family or your community, but you put it into a large body of water. And of course it's affecting anyway.
Yeah, and that would be introducing the family constellation therapy, which
yes.
But I think we've pretty much done it for today. Have we covered our?
I think so. I think so. Yes, thank you so much. And of course, as always, I'll have to review this like 5 or 6 times to even gain all the little nuggets. So what I want to tell our viewers and our guests is that the language that Dan uses, this rigorous language, this is what I found when I was looking for the language of light, the original language, is that, you know, we know that a picture is worth 1,000 words. Well, the words that Dan uses contains so much information. It's way more than the picture containing thousands of words. It really is. And so even if you think, oh yeah, I listened to that, that was nice. But if you go back and you listen again and even just meditate on a few of the terms maybe that Dan uses, this is another practical application for how to become that still point and become the sacred space of the shareable wave, because we got to get shareable. Have to.
Exactly. We find that still point together. Beautiful.
We do. Yes. Yes.
So,
thank you so much. Thank you always.
Thank you.
It's always so fun.
It's been blessings. See you soon.
See ya.
Take care. Bye-bye.